Well, he's back. Just when you thought it was safe, Texas billionaire H. Ross Perot surprised no one this week when he announced he is re-entering the political waters of the race for the presidency. Now, John Jacobs, word is that the Republicans have more or less written off California anyway. We've seen a lot of polls in the last couple of days, a lot of analysis, a lot of speculation on this, and word seems to be that this will affect Bush more nationwide, but in California it will have a harder hit on Clinton. Do you agree with that?
Was stunned when he got out by all the charges that he was a quitter.
But you know, a lot of people thought that that was brilliant in a way, that by keeping himself away from the sort of scrutiny that the other candidates were getting, that he could retain almost a kind of mythic presence as a candidate. So what are we learning about Perot, the candidate, now that he's back, in terms of nuts and bolts and what sort of proposals he's willing to put on the table?
That his negatives have doubled since he got out.
Well, the University of California came under fire this week. A federal investigation found that UC Berkeley's Bolt Law School discriminated against white students. Well, now that the budget battle is over, Governor Wilson is finding in many ways the pen is mightier than the sword. He spent most of this week signing into law hundreds of bills and vetoing many others. Now, we're out of time. I want to thank you all for being on the program tonight. And thank you for watching. We will see you again next week for another edition of This Week in Northern California. For KQED, I'm Ginger Casey. Have a good night. Well, it was another roller coaster week for those waiting for word on whether the San Francisco Giants will be staying in San Francisco or moving to Florida. Now, short-lived white knight George Shinn is out, but local investor heroes are still very much in. There's bad economic news this week, both nationally and here in California, as analysts predict our recession could go on another 2 years. The hot issue of term limits for members of Congress is one of the controversial propositions on the November ballot here in California. Another is Proposition 161, which would allow doctor-assisted death for terminally ill patients.
So how do you compute that real quick and figure out what the impact is?
We are out of time on the program. I would advise reading the small print very, very carefully before you pull any kind of levers in the booth. I want to thank you all for being on our program tonight, and thank you for watching. We will see you again next week for another edition of This Week in Northern California. For KQED, I'm Ginger Casey. Have a good night. Well, there aren't too many people who can pick up $700,000 for attending a lunch. But President George Bush made no secret that he was after more than cash when he came through California this week. Michael Collier, you covered his visit here in San Francisco. What exactly was he hoping for?
I think he's hoping to jumpstart his campaign.
All the attendees at the president's luncheons were dining on $1,000 a plate food. Many people in Contra Costa County were not eating at all. The county has seen an alarming increase in the number of poor and homeless the past year. Now, John King, why the sudden increase in it?
Because Contra Costa is not the suburbs anymore. You've got a lot of people who come there for jobs, and they're coming there for jobs that don't...
One of the stats that I read in your report was that the average length for a wait for a senior to get into low-income housing in the city of Martinez is 7 years. Now, are seniors finding themselves squeezed down to the poverty level by these kinds of growing economic demands?
Not so much squeezed down as the poverty levels coming up to them.
Okay, thanks. Well, 60, 16, 20, or maybe 6.5? No, we're not talking a score here or the latest lotto numbers, but big city budgets. Now, no one knows for sure, but San Francisco's budget deficit seems to have evaporated. Now, Phil Mateer, a few weeks ago, the city was predicting gloom and doom for its budget deficit, and now it's suddenly gone. What's happened?
It's kind of like the weather. I mean, you know, the predictions are out there, rain's coming, and it never does.
Well, in fairness to both administrations, is it that the numbers change that quickly, or are people really dropping the ball?
I think it's the economy's dropping, the numbers change, and also it's become this sort of fine science that's...
Almost as political as budgets in California is the ongoing fight over water. Now, the newest battle has Governor Wilson taking on the feds, claiming California should handle its own water, thank you very much. Well, Maya Krejci, give us the details on Wilson's push to get control of the state's largest water system.
Okay, first let's say this is not a state initiative. This is something that is plucked right out of the heart of one of the congressional bills that is now sitting in a committee in Washington, D.C. It's basically a farm support program. Most of its water goes to agriculture.
Well, doesn't the question come in then that if the state is in control of this, that it will be more susceptible to the pressures of agribusiness and the special interests?
Sure. What's happening right now is that you've got environmentalists in Congress.
We're out of time. I want to thank you all for being on the program tonight. And thank you for joining us. We will see you again next week with another edition of This Week in Northern California. For KQED, I'm Ginger Casey. Have a good night.